Hey, welcome back. So, before we get started, I just want to talk about a couple things. The first being that this course is fast paced, so you should be practicing the concepts at the end of each lesson. So, for example, last time we talked about primitive data types and how everything in Java is object except these 8 primitive data types. Should be working on how to declare a variable, how to assign a variable a value, how to print out that variable, and so forth. So the second thing I want to talk about is that everything in Java, there are keywords in Java. There are keywords in Java such as public and class and static and void. So what the Java compiler does is it looks for the class declaration, in this case public class main, and it tries to find the name of the class. The name of the class is main. It could be anything, right? It could be not main. It could be, just name, whatever. You can name anything you want, right? So it's looking for the name of the class. So it looks for the keyword class. And there's the keyword before that, public, and it tries to figure out, is this class public? Is it private? And we'll talk about public versus private versus protected in a future lesson. Next, I want to talk about regarding keywords that you can declare them as variables. So you can do int class equals 5 because class is a keyword. So a keyword also cannot be used as a variable. And another variable that's illegal is a variable that starts with numbers. You can't do int 5 equals 5. It has to be starting with a letter. So it can be like 5 because it starts with a letter, but it can't start with a number. So before we get started with conditional expressions, also I want to create some variables that we'll be using in our if statements. So let's start with declaring some variables. We'll start with double plain pizza slice cost equals 3.00. As you notice, we're using camel case here. So we have lowercase p for plain. Every other letter that starts a word in this variable starts with a capital letter, like P, capital for pizza, S, capital for slice, and C, capital for cost. Now, we talked about this in the last lecture, but I just want to reiterate the point that these are camel case naming conventions. So we want to have different slices. So we're going to have a double pepperoni pizza slice cost, and we'll let that equal to 3.50. And finally, we'll have a veggie slice cost just for some variety. Pizza slice cost equals, let's make that $4, because as we know, like veggie slices are expensive for some reason. And then let's create an if statement now. So the first conditional expression we'll be talking about today is an if statement. So we do if, and we do left parenthesis, and it automatically creates a right parenthesis for us. And as you notice, there's an error here because it's looking for a curly brace, left curly brace, and then we have a right curly brace. And there's still an error because it's looking for something inside, right? It says expression expected. And it's looking for a Boolean expression, something that can be true or false. So for example, plain pizza slice cost equals 3.00. And we noticed we didn't do like equals with one equal, we did double equals because in if statements, the Boolean expression requires a double equals, right? So if plain pizza slice cost equals 3, we're going to print something out. And a shortcut for printing something out is if you just type in SOUT, you get a pop-up and you can just select the one you want. In this case, we want system.println, so we're going to do SOUT, click enter or return, and it autofills that for you, so it's autocomplete. So we're going to print something out here. We're going to say true, and if you run this, so you click the green button again on the left, and it's going to run the method, or you can actually just run the whole method, run the whole class, but either way it will run the main method. and we get true. So that makes sense, right? Because we assign a value of 3.00 to plain pizza cost, and we check if 3.00 equals 3.00, right? And if we make it, for example, less than 3, and run it again, then we should get nothing, because it's going to skip this. It's going to say it's not true. It's actually always false, because so we get a warning here saying that this condition is always false because we're hard coding the right hand side, right? So we should be trying to make this more dynamic. So let's go do that. Let's create another function. We'll call this function can afford pizza, and we'll pass in a value for how much money we currently have. So we'll say double money in wallet, and we get an error here because return type is required. So for example, this is a return type of void because the main doesn't return anything. So there is no return type in the main method, and we're going to actually make this also void because we don't want to return anything. We just want to print something out. So let's make that void, and there's no more errors, right? But if we try to call this function, so functions can be called other functions. If you try to call this function in the main method, right, and we pass in a value because it's expecting a value. Let's pass in, like, for example, 5.5, and we add it semicolon to end because it's a statement. It says that it cannot be referenced from a static context, and this sounds really confusing, but this is a non-static method inside a static method. So anything inside a static method that is a function, declaration, or invocation has to be static itself. So all we gotta do is just add static at the beginning of this function, and if we try to add static, for example, after the return type, we can't do that because the order matters. So it has to be static goes before the return type. So if you try to make this function static, for example, in the main method, you can see it's public first, then static, then void. So before static, you can't do static private or public void. Actually you can, I'm sorry. You can do that, I meant to say, but it's not recommended. The default way, or the correct way, is usually to specify the access of the method or variable before anything else. So we're not going to make it public or private or anything. We're just going to keep it without anything, and that default is package protected. So you can only call this function in the same package. And right now we don't even have a package, so let's not worry about that right now. So also you notice that there is something on the left hand side here that IntelliJ auto completes for you, and it's the variable name that you're assigning. So IntelliJ is basically saying that you're assigning 5.50 to the variable money in wallet. And money in wallet here is called a parameter. So you have zero more parameters inside a function. So you can have 0 parameters, or you could have 1 parameter, or you can have more than 1 parameter. You can have 1 or more, or 0 or more, sorry. Let's say parameter 2, but then it's expecting a value here. So if you pass in, like, for example, 5, and now there it goes away because we're passing in the expected amount of parameters, because this function has 2 parameters, so we have to pass in 2 parameters values for these parameters. Well, let's undo that because we only want 1. So we have a function now, and we want to pass in a value, which is how much money we have in our wallet, and we want to add some logic inside this function. Now, so we have a function that has no logic, right? So let's get rid of this for a second, and let's go ahead and run this. And nothing should be printed out because we're not printing anything out, number 1. Number 2, this function is empty. There's nothing going on in this function, right? So let's go ahead and add an if statement here, right? If money in wallet is greater than or equal to the cost of, let's say, the plain pizza, right? Let's copy this and paste that. And we have an error because it can't find a simple plain pizza slice cost. And that's because something called scope. The scope of this variable is only from line 5 to line 12 because it's inside this function, right? So the scope is inside a function, so it has local scope inside this function. We want this to be a global variable so that every function can see the value of plain pizza slice. So if you move these three to be global variables, and all global variables mean is that they can be seen by everybody, then we can actually use it in other functions such as can afford pizza. But there's still a problem here, and it's saying a non-static field cannot be referenced from a static context. Just like the non-static function cannot be referenced from a static context, the same thing with a variable. So the variables also have to be static because you're calling a static, you're using a static variable inside a static function. So they both have to be static, okay? So let's make all these static. And let's print something out. So if money in wallet is greater than or equal to plain pizza slice cost, we're going to say SOUT to autocomplete our system print line, and we're going to say can afford a plain slice. We'll have another if statement here. If money in wallet is greater than or equal to pepperoni pizza slice cost, and we're going to say, we're going to also autocomplete again, the print line to make it easier for us. We're going to say can afford a pepperoni slice. And finally, we are going to do a third if statement for the veggie one and say if money in wallet is greater than or equal to veggie pizza slice cost, and we're going to print it out and say same thing, can afford a veggie slice. So we have three if statements here, right? And let's say the money is 5.5, which is more than any of these values. Then we should be able to see all three statements in our console, right? So let's go see if that's actually correct. So let's run the function main, and we get all three in our console, which makes sense, right? Because like I said, 5.5 is greater than 3, 3.5, and 4. So let's make the money now only 3. So now we should only see the first statement run, which is this one, because money in wallet equals 3. Oops. And as you can see here, only the first one got printed out. Now if we make it, for example, 3.70, you can afford everything but the veggie because the veggie is $4. So we get 2 printed out. So you see how this works? So it goes from the line 15 to line 25. It goes in order. So important thing about Java is it doesn't randomly pick which one to do first. If you notice that can afford plain slice is always printed before pepperoni, and pepperoni is always printed out before veggie because it does in order. So it does this first, then it does this, and it does this. And it checks if each one is true because this is a Boolean expression, right? So is this true or false? If it's true, it prints this out. If it's true, it prints this out. If it's true, it prints this out. And if it's all false, for example, if you do 1, then it just says false, don't do anything, false, don't do anything, false, don't do anything. And as you can see, we didn't print anything out this time. So that is how if statements work. And let's just do one more example so we can have multiple Boolean expressions in the same, multiple expressions in the same Boolean expression. So let's add another example here. So let's do, instead of pizza, let's do beer. So let's say the beer cost is $4. So we're at a College Bar because that's pretty cheap. and then we do int static int legal drinking age equals 21. So we're going to check if someone is able to buy beer. So they have to be 21 or over, and they have to have enough money to buy the beer. So there's two expressions here. There's two things you have to factor in, right? So let's create the function. Static boolean can buy a beer. And we're going to pass in two parameters this time because there's two things to evaluate on. Their age and how much money they have, right? And we're going to say if age is greater than or equal to legal drinking age, you can buy the beer. Well, one thing I just forgot was make this boolean. I should actually make this void. So because we're not returning anything. So the other thing is we're only evaluating the age, right? So we're not evaluating how much money you have. So we have to actually change this so that we can say if age is greater than or equal to legal drinking age. We can have another if inside the if. So we can say if this is true, go into this if. So if age is greater than or equal to legal drinking age, we check how much money they have. So if money in wallet is greater than or equal to beer cost, then we print out the print line statement inside the second if. So we can have nested ifs. This is called a nested if because it's two or more ifs like nested. So they're like one inside another. You can have multiple. You can have like 5 nested ifs. You can have 10 nested ifs, whatever. I recommend to not have too many nested ifs because then it gets really complicated. So we can go ahead and run this now. So let's run this in the main. So let's comment this out so it's not being run, and let's run this one instead. Can buy a beer. Let's pass in 22 and let's pass in $5. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So we should get this printed out because we're over the legal drinking age. This is 21 in America, and we have enough money to buy the beer. So as you can see here, we print it out. You can buy the beer. Now, how can we combine this to be one statement? Well, instead of having nested ifs, we can just make it into one. So we can remove this. Whoops. And remove this. So now we have one if statement. And we can have an and here, right? So and if age is greater than or equal to legal drinking age and money in wallet is greater than or equal to the beer cost, right? So now, instead of having nested ifs, we can put it all in one. Run this again. We should still get the statement run because this is still true, right? Now, if we change it to, let's say, 20, it's going to return nothing because they both have to be true because the and is saying if this and this, then print this out. Okay, so for example, if one of them is false and one is true in this example, that's the case, like we're not old enough to drink beer, but we have enough money, then it's going to return false. Or if we're old enough, but we don't have the money, we only have $3, we still can't buy the beer because they both have to be true, right? So it's not going to print anything out. All right, so that basically sums up if statements. So let's go ahead and move on to if-else statements. So we'll do that in the next lesson.